Hi there, Coach H. Kennedy of V2Max Productions here with another training talk. Excuse me if the river in the background is a little noisy. Sandy and I are camping outside of Lake City, Colorado, one of the most isolated cities in Colorado. We just ran up and down a 14,000 foot peak, Un Compadre it's called. It was a 16-mile round trip run. Sandy's still out adding on. She's going to go over 20-mile long run today. We already had 5,500 feet of climbing in this 8 miles out and back basically, and it was snowing on us up there, super cold. I had like 4 layers on. But today we're going to talk about tapering, and it's kind of something I've touched on. I've done a training talk on tapering before, like 4 years ago. I linked to it at the end of this video, but that was more for the marathon road taper. This is a all-inclusive taper training talk video because I think it is a little bit different if you're tapering for an ultra marathon or a trail race or a half marathon, marathon. It does depend on some factors which I want to outline in this video today, but yeah, definitely needed an update on that. It's a tricky thing, tapering is, and you know, I'll admit it's something that I haven't necessarily done 100% always successfully. I've definitely overtrained and had residual fatigue heading into races. Euroc 100K out in Colorado in 2013 comes to mind as a race that I came out dead-legged. It totally blew off my taper. Didn't taper enough basically, and just was overtrained as well. But the first thing with tapering is probably working backwards from your goal race day, and thinking, you know, is this my key race of the whole season? Is this a race that's really important to me? And if it is, we're gonna assume it is, looking back at least 10 days before that, maybe even 2 weeks before that, maybe even 2.5 weeks before that, and saying, with that last 10 or 14 days or 16 days, what am I gonna do to make sure I arrive on the starting line in peak shape, but also in peak shape because my legs are fresh and because I haven't overtrained and I'm not still tired from residual cumulative fatigue that's built up from all my hard training that I've done for weeks and weeks and weeks and months and leading into that event. So the first general thing is a cutback in volume, a cutback in mileage. And again, it depends on what your highest weekly mileage has been, it depends what your experience level is, and it depends what race distance you're doing. But generally you're going to have to cut back your mileage quite a bit. Now how much? Well, I'll give an example. Say we have a marathon runner focusing on a marathon, 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks going into the marathon, maybe they hit 50, 55 miles a week as a high, as their high. Maybe they hit that 4 or 5 weeks before the race. Well, now 2 weeks before the race, maybe they're only going to run 40 miles a week. And the last week before the race, the last 7 days heading into the race, not counting the race, maybe they're only going to run 35 or 30 miles that week. And they're going to maybe even take a couple days off. Maybe 3 days before the race, you have to travel out to a race, you have to get on an airplane flight or do a long car drive. Maybe you just don't even run that day. But I always recommend jogging at least 3 or 4 miles really easy the day before a race, just to get your legs loose. And that's all, you know, just keeping the legs loose. Whereas if you're counting back a week from a race, you're not doing any really hard workouts that are gonna benefit you that much. So we've looked at volume, cutting back your volume. Now if you're running, you know, if you're only running 30 miles a week or about 50K per week, then, you know, you probably don't want to taper back to 10 miles a week or, you know, 16K a week. You probably still want to run 20 miles a week at least. So the taper's not maybe quite as drastic if you're on the lower mileage side. Whereas if I'm running 100 miles a week, a lot training for a race, maybe I'll cut back to 80 and then 70 or 60s in the last 2 weeks heading into my goal race. Now, with 100-mile ultras, I think the longer ultras, especially 100K, 100 miles in the mountains, things are going to take forever, the taper is more important, because if you screw it up, you can get really, really screwed. And you want to really make sure your legs are fresh. So I think the last week, you could drastically cut back a ton of volume for ultras. And like next week, going into Run Rabbit Run, I'm gonna taper a lot. I might take a day off. I might do a little 5-mile jog here and there, 8-mile jog, but I'm not gonna even run over 10 miles a day, which is not very much for me. It's all relative though. So that's volume. Now the second thing we look at with tapering is intensity, and it's a matter of relative intensity. But say you've been doing a lot of maybe some tempo runs, lactate threshold types of runs, 85% effort, those kinds of things. That's usually really good at preserving your fitness maybe 10 days out from a race, a week out from a race, maybe as your last workout before a race. We like to do a real light, maybe tempo run 3 or 4 days out from the race. But it's not hard. It's very short. It's very, you've cut back the volume on this intense workout, and you're keeping the intensity at 85% of your maximum heart rate. For a short distance, it's maybe half of what you could do you know, in your peak training 4 or 5 weeks out from your race. So you're still doing some workouts to maintain fitness and to get your heart rate up above the lactate threshold, but you're not really trying to push the envelope and do these monster workouts in the last 10 days before your race, because your body's not gonna recognize the benefit of those workouts really. You could do a really hard VO2 max workout, you know, mile repeats, 4 or 5 by 1600 meters, or 6 to 8 by a kilometer by 1000 meters. You know, super hard. You do some super hard real hill repeats, destroy yourself. But the real benefits from that workout usually take at least 7 to 10 days, at least 2, or actually they take more like 2 weeks to really kick in. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to do these as hard as you can types of workouts with high volume, high relative volume in the workouts within 10 days or 12 days of your race. It's just not worth it. So if you want to do that last hard VO2 max workout, you probably want to do it at least 12 to 14 days out. You could actually get some real benefit from it. Now, on the fine line, there are ways, mainly this is applicable to shorter races. If you race a less than 10K, 5K, sometimes coaches will have athletes do some really fast types of track workouts that induce a lot of lactate, a high amount of lactic acid, and the buffering capacity might kick in within a couple days. But in general, for distance runners, 10K and above, you don't need to be doing that kind of stuff really ever that much, because you're not fighting tons of lactic acid usually. What you want to ensure is that you have adequate muscle tension in your legs, that you're not totally all flimsy like Gumby, and that, you know, you're not coming out too stale really. You want to make sure you're fresh when you toe that starting line. Your legs have a little bit of muscle tension in them from a tempo type of workout that you've done maybe 3 days before. But that your muscle fibers are not exhausted from doing a bunch of high intensity, high volume types of workouts. Now, since you're cutting back the volume, that's definitely going to help. That being said, you still have to have some element of maybe a medium length long run in there, especially if you've been training for really long ultras. You can't just go cold turkey and not doing any more long runs in the last 3 weeks, or you might start losing your fine edge of endurance, so to speak. But the other thing is looking at it at a metabolic level. If you start cutting back your volume and you keep eating the same amount that you've been eating, maybe you're eating a ton because you've been training really hard for the last month, you might start gaining a little weight. And so instead of having to really cut back on your portion size and you know, worry about that, it's still good to have some element of intensity in your taper. And so that's why we always do the tempo run. And that's why we always, you know, still do a medium long run. And you'll see this in our sagerunning.com plans. We have training plans for half marathon, marathon, 50K, 50 miles, 100K, 100 miles on our website, sagerunning.com. You can check out those. That is definitely a coaching business plug. But a lot of our plans have that kind of element in the taper, built into the taper structure. And that's basically why I'm telling you it's important, is you're keeping the muscle tension there, you're keeping your metabolism in check, you're not doing anything too drastically different, but you are cutting back on your mileage, you are not doing super hard workouts anymore, because it's not a matter of boosting your fitness to this really high new level in the last 2 weeks of your taper. It's really about maintaining your fitness. You've already reached a high level of fitness. Hopefully you've done your hardest workouts 3 to 4 weeks out before your goal race, and you've had a consistent block of 4 to 6 weeks even before that of doing some moderate workouts. But because you're resting and you're allowing your body to recover, it gives you that little extra boost. I call it super compensation, basically. The stress from previous weeks of maybe a 4-week block or a 6-week block of training that you did last month is finally starting to kick in, and you're starting to see that benefit, the residual benefit of all this training coming together. And when you rest, you could really capitalize on all that hard work that you've been doing for the last 6 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks. And so that's really the gist of tapering. It's always better, I think, to be more on the conservative side and risk losing a little bit of fitness than overtraining and not tapering enough and towing the starting line overtrained. Because if you're 1% overtrained, you're screwed, right? If you're trying to go 101%, it's not going to work. You could have a horrible epic bonk race. You could start off exhausted, just totally out of your element. Whereas if you're only 90% trained or 95% trained, you could still have a really good race and a really solid performance. So much better to be 10% undertrained than 1% overtrained. That's always been my philosophy, and some might say it's a conservative philosophy, but you know, it's a delicate balance, and it does depend on the individual. It depends on other life stresses as well. You know, if you're getting enough sleep or if you're eating healthy, things like that. But that's my talk on tapering. Thanks so much for subscribing. Thanks so much for tuning in. You can check out a podcast on iTunes. Again, check out our website, coaching website, sagerunning.com. Thanks so much for all the support, guys. Couldn't do this without you. And stay tuned for more via 2Max Productions.